the NFL, to discuss the Kings, as we are, Chris, just a couple days away from the Kings tipping off their season. And really the expectations for the Kings are, I would say, starting to pick up here. Preseason is not going to rain on my parade. I still think the Kings are going to be a darn good basketball team, and there are a lot of reasons to feel like that. And I wanted to bring this up, Chris, and phrase it in this way, right? Because there are a lot of teams in the Northern California Bay Area, and this is what we're dealing with right now. The Niners obviously have a losing record. Christian McCaffrey out. Brandon Ayuk, we think, might be out as well. Season isn't looking great, all right? Giants fire their GM. Now they have Buster Posey, who still needs to kind of hire that GM. Buster Posey, president, baseball operations. Dodgers are in the World Series, and the Giants just can't really seem to land one of the big fish free agents. The A's, we don't have to go into that detail, but the A's are in a transition period right now. They leave Oakland. They're headed to Sacramento. Better season than what a lot of people thought, but they are nowhere near the cream of the crop in Major League Baseball. The San Jose Earthquakes just had one of their worst seasons ever. The Sharks, they're in the middle of a rebuild, and their number one draft pick gets injured. The Warriors are on a senior citizen tour. And then you have Stanford football, who's been a bit of a mess, and Cal, who has given us some good moments, but they're still working their way up as well. Which leads me all the way back around to the Kings, Chris, to say, do the Kings have the most promise out of all Northern California teams right now, or I guess the most hope out of Northern California teams right now?
I think it's still the Niners. I mean, the Niners still have Super Bowl hopes, and I think realistically their team is built more to potentially make a run than the Kings do. I mean, the Kings, we think, are going to be fun this year, but I think a lot of people think that the ceiling for this team is probably a healthy second-round appearance, and the floor for this team is potentially, I mean, I think Jason said it, like he can see them up as high as a 1 seed, and he can see them as low as an 11 seed. Like, I think there's a chance that this team also doesn't even make the play-in. So, definitely there's more optimism, and I think more people would lean towards the optimism side for the Kings, but I think the Niners still probably have the advantage of being, if you were to try and label who is the best team in specifically Northern California, because we know the Dodgers definitely have the California in a stranglehold right now, but I would say that it's probably still the Niners only because of how talented they are.
It's still the Niners, but I'm willing to say that it could shift, right? If the Kings get off to a hot start, which would mean they would actually have to win a basketball game, and let's say the Niners just continue on this path, and they lose to the Cowboys, or they split those first two games where they beat the Cowboys and lose to the Bucks, or they lose both games, or they beat the Bucks and lose to the Cowboys, one of the two. I do think that there would be some people that could have that conversation. Obviously, we could bring up the Warriors, but I think the Kings have more promise than the Warriors this season, and we'll get into around the NBA. The Warriors just cash out Moses Moody, who is now, I think, a top 5 paid player on that team that Steve Kerr refuses to pay. So they've been a bit of a mess, and Kuminga looks like he's going to head to restricted free agency. I think that the Kings, at worst, they're second, Chris, which is, a little something to hang your hat on. I mean, maybe it says more about the rest of the teams in the area, but, the Giants of the world and teams like that, the Warriors still have Steph Curry, but I think that the Kings are, if it's not the Kings and it's the Niners, the Kings are firmly in second place here.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think definitely if it's not the Niners, I mean, the other teams are in straight up rebuilds or are just playing terribly or relocating. So absolutely. I mean, the Kings are at least building positively, and I mean, the Warriors feel like they're doing something, and maybe, you ask some Warrior fans, I know our signal reaches out to the Bay Area quite a bit. Some of them might say that, the Kings or the Warriors are building at least more veterans, and maybe they won't be the top end talent, but they believe that, again, just get them in the dance and they can compete at the same level. I think the Kings just are still such a big unknown. I mean, I think I definitely hope that DeMar DeRozan's going to come in and make this team a lot better, but, I think there still is the possibility that things are a little clunky, and who knows? Maybe the preseason was a sign of things to come. I think it's a possibility, but I definitely think the Kings, momentum-wise and I think vibe-wise, definitely feel like they're the best. But I think Warrior fans still believe that they're holding on to something that they probably think is just as good, if not better, than what the Kings have, only because of Steph. I seriously think that the Warriors really do believe that they are competing at the same level as the Kings.
We've brought this up when it comes to trade pieces, and you've always said, hey, when it comes to Keegan Murray, I mean, not that you wouldn't ever move him, but he's really the best kind of young asset you have. And I would say that the Kings have more promise than the Warriors, but I also feel like the Kings should, based on where they're at. If you look at where the Warriors are at,
oh, yeah, undoubtedly.
You have Moses Moody, who what his value is now, he has a contract attached to him. Jonathan Kuminga, who we still think has that high ceiling. What else are we going to do with it? Brandon Pajemski, as much as we joke about him, I do think he is well-liked throughout the league. Trace Jackson Davis as well. I knew that was coming. Trace Jackson Davis as well. The Warriors, they do have a future. They might think it's brighter than what the rest of us think, but they do have pieces. You look at this Kings team, if they don't make some type of run this season, Chris, and at least give themselves hope as far as, hey, we can get to that level and make a finals run, they don't really have anything to fall back on as far as their future, right? I mean, the Mason Jones and the Colby Jones of the world, those are all nice stories, but as far as their value, I don't think, I don't even know if you would put them in the conversation as sweeteners. So we're in a situation where the Kings do have the most hope, besides maybe the Niners, but they also should have the most hope based on the moves that they've made. And it's almost as if they're not all in, but at the same time, they need to show that, I guess, there is a reason for them to be all in based on what they do this season. You missed the playoffs, and I don't really know what you do next.
Well, I mean, yeah, you could look at maybe moving on from, you move on from some of your big pieces, perhaps. I mean, it depends how bad the season goes and for what reason. I mean, if it's for injury's sake, then obviously you're probably just chalk it down to injuries and you'll say, hey, we'll give it a go next year. But, if it's guys not living up to their potential, if it's DeMar maybe not being as good of a fit, maybe you look to move on from DeMar DeRozan. You could probably still get something good, but I think that's that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think there's definitely paths. I mean, if they wanted to, if they don't play well and De'Aaron starts to signal that he's maybe not going to re-sign, you could look to move on from him. You could look at Sabonis. It doesn't have to be one of your young assets that you move on for, even though I think you could still get a really decent haul for Keegan. Keon Ellis is on a freaking amazing contract that I think any team in the NBA would want. I think there's plenty of maneuvers that this team could make if things go bad, but I think it would have to go really, really bad in order for them to really consider moving on from players. I mean, we saw that Mike Brown, there was a little bit of back and forth with those negotiations. As much as I would hate to see it, I think Mike Brown would probably be the first thing to go if the team doesn't meet expectations.
Well, we're not there yet, but this thing can escalate or de-escalate quickly if you don't get off to the right start. Let's take a trip around the NBA when we return. Stiles and Watkins, Sactown Sports.
Sactown, the Beam Team